Greetings everybody. I'm delighted to have you back in another round of AGC webinars. My name is Suzana Ayeti, Account Manager for AGC and the PCB's organizer for this session. Today's topic is the dynamics of EMS monitoring, measurement and process flow accounting with ISO 40001, ISO 40031 and ISO 40051. This webinar is centers on appreciating the relationship of two EMS guidelines and effectively complying with the requirements in ISO 40001. To talk about this and much more, joining us is PCB certified trainer, a senior consultant in SAS management, Mr. Joshua Albarina. Feel free to write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, and Mr. Josh will answer to them accordingly. Moreover, if you want to participate directly in the discussion with Mr. Josh, you can also raise your hand, and then we will unmute your microphone and you can make your questions directly to him. Please, Mr. Josh, you may start the presentation.
All right, thank you, Susanna, and good day, everybody, wherever you may be in parts of the world, and welcome to this small discussion on EMS. While this is typically a talk that would last for an hour, we'll compress it for as much as we can, focusing on what is really the essential, on what it takes for an organization to work on environmental management systems, putting aside also to side emphasis on 14031 and 14051. These these guidelines rather, despite the fact that it's got a very good catch on implementing 14001, are the guidelines where we oftentimes, or in my perspective, are mostly neglected for, since everything that is mentioned is in 14001. So we'll get into the bottom of how these two guidelines complement in implementing 14001 and see how it can create value, more than just environmental value, but also the business value to the organization. So these are the things that we'll be discussing over the next few minutes. We'll first start with talking about 14001, the latest version, and what does it mean to really get in with 14001, or if you are subject for transition from 2004 up to 2015, at least you have a quick look on what's going to take place. Meanwhile, for some organizations who have already been practicing 14001, there's something that we need. There are some things that we need to know about the relationships between environment and enterprise, and how EMS can play a role, especially in creating a level of transparency, which for most of the stakeholders and interested parties are very particular on it. And understanding with that, we can go now and bridge further our performance by understanding first with 14031, which talks about evaluating environmental performance, and then going further with assessing material flows in 14051. This one is a very interesting guideline because given the nature of 14001, particularly in clause 4, which talks about the context of the organization, and that is a strong message for most of the practitioners, where you have to focus on the process level and then try to do some level of stringent accounting practices. 14051 provides us a level of detail which is very useful, particularly in defining what it takes to have a good environmental management system. The good, we quote it, as most of the practice would be, and how it can create a level of reliability using the 14051 along also with 14031. And then understanding these two guidelines, how can we see, we will see how it will implement, or should we say how it will further complement the organization's EMS with the synergy of material flow analysis and environmental performance evaluation, well defined in these two guidelines called 14031 and 14051 respectively. And if we talk about in the context of what does it mean for an organization who wants to see inclusive growth, not include, but also in business growth, we're going to talk about a bit about the road ahead, particularly in carbon credits and sustainability reporting. And And as we all know that most of the trends right now are heavily inclining to these topics. These are really hot topics for most of the enterprises who wish to see opportunities where they can trade off or create monetary value with their environmental performance through trading off their carbon registered C certified emission reductions, and then also in a way to create a level of reputation that precedes or that transcend above the norms. We also have to talk a bit about reporting techniques and how can the 14031 and 14051 will support in this endeavor. So we'll start now with talking about the 14,001. We all know that 14,001 had a long way of how it all started. And we talk about the latest version. It was started in 2013. And in the same manner with the quality management system, Guide 83 was included, which talks about the high-level structure, or we all know it as Annex SL. And with that inclusion, in September 2015, it was released by the Technical Committee 207 with these 5 points to consider in the design and the release of this version, which we all know. And to simplify, to summarize it, we have the 5 following: harmonizing with other standards and ease out integration, and risk orientation. That's actually in clause 6. And comprehensive contextualization and process orientation, as we've seen it in clause 4. And a life cycle perspective, that's also around in clause 4. And then stringent environmental performance, as defined in clause 9, particularly in 9.1. And and with that being said, we go now straight to understanding the synergy between the environment and enterprise. So we start about the organization, where all of the organization, where all the process and activities and all of the enablers that would process the release of products and services, everything begins with an input and certain level degree of outputs, and we define them as products, services, and excess. And while this is a one-way chain of production, in order to ensure that we are effective in the way we do the business, controls exist. And these controls, well, these are more or less what we call as the quality practices or ID practices. You can name as many as those, but what's clear here is that in order for us to define the level of quality that the organization intends to achieve, controls are needed in order to be achieved. Well, we also have to include EMS, but let's put that standard in a different light. While EMS embraces the enterprise in terms of environmental aspects, it also finds its way to manage industrial emissions. And industrial emissions, as we all know, is a hot topic on most organizations who are now keen on telling industries to reduce their environmental impacts or they will be penalized. So that being said, industrial emissions will have to be regulated in some fashion. That's why there are some, in some countries you have the Ministry for Environment. Well, in here in the Philippines, we have the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. These guys are the ones who are putting environmental practices at the forefront across all industries, such that when they do the business, they are also providing positive impacts, not just only to the society, but also to the environment and sustainability as it is called. So with 14,001 in the front of these, we also have to recognize that when the requirements are there, we have to ask ourselves, how do we define our measurements, and how do we define our way of collecting the figures in order for us to come up with sound measurements? So as 14,000 is a family of standards beginning with the guidelines, terms, life cycle, and then we have also the 14064. Little did we know that there are also standards that talks about performance evaluation, and this is ISO 14031, which is the recent, it has released its latest version, that's 2015. And we also have to mention that there's also a standard that talks about how to carefully create resource calculations or resource flow analysis, and that is beautifully wrapped in the standard 14051. And this is an acronym which means material flow and cost accounting. So it's not just only the cash flows, but also the resource flows, where this guideline is dedicated to. These two guidelines, as I've said before, basically complements how EMS is performed within the organization, simply by adding further numbers to the indicators and at the same time to the business figures where the top management, including also those interested parties, are more particular with, especially for environmental practice, where we're not just dealing with only the stakeholders, but well, the shareholders, but also stakeholders, where like communities, legal organizations, environmental organizations, where they demand a lot of transparency. That is also an experience here in the Philippines, where there are some government agencies or NGOs where their first line of push is basically on providing industrial transparency. So industry practitioners, well, they have to ask themselves, how can we provide figures? So this is where the two guidelines will find it useful. This is in some of the projects are beautifully wrapped, like for example in cleaner production, where we talk about how to carefully measure, find out what are the possible options that you can make using a certain system, which we'll talk about it later, and at the same time how to come up with figures and how to come up with indicators. Well, actually for cleaner production, that's where the prime is. Well, we also have to recognize we move on. And let's start with the evaluating environmental performance and what management must do first on environmental impacts with less compromise. We know that from most of the management systems, metrics are a key factor to tell that our management systems have served its purpose of improving the company's processes when it comes to manufacturing practices. And its importance has been increasingly important in the past years for successful management, particularly in defining business figures. And it will also secure the existence of a company in the long run. And it typically, in coming up with figures, you only have typically three things: planning, controlling, and monitoring a company. In this case, it's considering about environmental factors. And they are basically, as I've said before, a useful management tool for environmental controlling, particularly about, we talk about the aspects like energy, water, and air, and resource hazardous chemicals. And how this is the framework of how of 14031, and it will all start with the organization. And an organization, they are responsible in making sure that they are not producing so much impacts to the environment, particularly the negative impacts, and the reason why 14001 was designed so. And it will have to distinguish further by operations management and organizational management. We're talking about, if the context of strategic, tactical, and operational, the organizational management is more focused on strategic and tactical, while for operations it's also a mix of tactical and operational level. So we're talking more about the activities and processes in the operations, while strategy and tactics for the organizational management respectively. Now in 14031, these are classified into two indicators. But before we go further on that part, the organization is also responsible for identifying the environmental condition and other sources, while at the same time they have also to pay attention to what the interested parties are looking forward or knowing or interested in the organization's performance in the context of environment management. While operations at the same time, they will have to do two-way communication with the organizational management group in order to evaluate activities and particularly in how physical facilities and equipment are managed, so that it will not further create impacts, while at the same time create the level of nonconformity in the way they do business. And at the same time, organizational groups, or should we say the top management, will have also to create a level of mandate for operations, so that the strategy is unified across all management levels. Having said that one, at the operational level, the facilities and equipments, including the materials, will have to be responsible in managing the inputs and as well also the outputs. And with that, we see now how the organization behaves. Now, the context of environment, we can classify them as what we call the environmental condition indicators, or commonly known as ECI. But for the management, at the strategic level, we have the management performance indicators, and at the operations management, we have as well the operational performance indicators. These three are, well, in the previous version of 14031 are classified, or this is the level of classification for defining indicators. And this is also popular back prior to 14031, and has been practiced by several countries. Now, we talk about these three indicators.
Yes, Mr. Jones, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, which slide did we miss?
One before this one.
Okay, this one.
One more.
Okay,
yes.
this.
Yes. I'm sorry, but your audio was, something was missing, so we apologize to our attendees, so you can continue once again.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, apologies to everyone. We have, I have some internet connection issues here, so now I'm back. So to keep this to talk about it simply, the organization basically focuses more on how do they perform on a regular basis. But in context of environment, it also has the same principle. However, this can be classified further into these three types of indicators as you've seen it. I'm explaining this simply to summarize what has been discussed earlier. So in the context of 14031, we talk about three things in terms of defining the indicators. We start with the environmental condition indicators, called as ECI. In the context of the top management, or how things are managed in the organization, we have the management performance indicators. And in the context of activities and processes, we have the operational performance indicators. So we talked about, so we now go further by digging understanding what does it mean by environmental condition indicators, which describes the quality of the environment surrounding the company. And also we have the management performance indicators, where it presents the organizational actions the management is taking to minimize the company's environmental impact. Followed which we have the operational performance indicators, which allows the assessment and control of the environmental impacts at the process, and may I add, at the activity level. So you can see this in the picture. Most of the people involved here will play a role in defining or in creating further substance to the environmental performance indicators at an operational level. So what does that? Some examples for condition indicators, we have it here. For management performance indicators, we also have this. And at the operational level, to mention a few, we have absolute energy consumption, as you can get it from the company's energy bills, waste per unit of output. So these are something that needs to be carefully measured, that in the following slides, 14051 will support that one by understanding what does it take to have a good material or resource balance. Then we go now by understanding how does it work then if we want to define an EPE. We start by planning and selecting the indicators. So that would also mean that you will have also to identify what are the aspects and impacts of the organization, so that for you to define what are the suitable indicators across environmental condition, the management, and the operation levels. Then it will go cascade further to executing these indicators to defining what are those. So we first collect data, then we analyze, and then we assess the information. And then once these are carefully assessed, which this is more of evaluating which of the indicators showed a good performance and which indicators showed a good reflection to the organization's performance, and then that will be used to report and communicate to the top management. Ultimately, all of these things needs to synergize together for you to review and improve the indicators. And then it will go back to the top management or to the management team in order to replan things up or improve these indicators. So basically, this diagram as seen here is where it explains how does EPE works. And when doing so, these principles, we go through reminding ourselves about these 6 principles. These are not mentioned in 14031, but for one organization to create the indicators as defined in that framework, one must remember these 6, at least these 6 principles in mind. So we're going to go through about this a little. We begin with comparability, where indicators must allow comparisons to be made and must reflect changes of environmental impacts and must show a good level of orientation, where indicators should pursue improvement goals that can be influenced by the company. And also balance. Indicators must represent the environmental performance as accurately as possible and provide a balanced illustration of environmental problem as well as improvement potentials. Also continuity, where it is essential that the data collected must be able to be used, must be usable as you move along, and that would, while at the same time creates a certain reflection of the company. This in turn, if you collect this data over time, will show a certain trend that management wants to see in order for them to create a level of decision. This is something that's crucial for the top management for the next steps. And finally, timeliness. So these indicators should be determined in short intervals. So there are certain indicators where, in practice, you can check it on a regular basis, as frequent as possible, like daily, and the other one is monthly, the other one is quarterly, and the other one is annually. So there are many indicators where they are properly assessed in terms of collected in terms of time, so that it will have its opportunity to present itself and provide a level of analysis for the management to evaluate their decisions in terms of assessing environmental performance. Finally, the next principle on focus is about clarity. Indicators must be clear and comprehensible for the user and must correspond to the user's information requirements and should therefore be coherent and concentrate on what really is the most important set of data. While science of things will provide a level of explanation, ultimately it's about being practical. What are the data that is crucial to the organization are the things that should be given further attention. So with that, that's 14031. Now, we talked about earlier how to get these numbers and basing on the indicators. Now we go to assessing material flows, and that will give us an explanation why optimal is significantly enough. Now, the honest intention of material flow and cost accounting is that it provides transparency of resource that is used within the bounds of the organization, or simply it develops a flow model, and then that highlight the costs associated with the material flows in the process, and further reduce adverse environmental impacts caused by irregular resource flows through sound environmental projects based on carefully assessed material flows. While this is a good intention, the question is how we're going to do it. We start by understanding what does it mean to have an MFA, as it is sometimes called. It's a tool basically for quantifying the flows and stocks of materials in the processes or production lines in both physical and monetary units. And then we go to what are these fundamental elements. We start with identifying a quantity center. So we talk about the processes where material flows in and out of the organization, or in the certain process at least, and where, for example, in an organization's premise, we talk about the warehouse. How many items are shipped inside? How many items are shipped outside? Those are the warehouse is ultimately an example of a quantity center, and by the principles of quality management, we can closely associate this with the first in, first out policies. Followed next is, once you know what are these processes, then you conduct a material balance. it's called material balance simply because it's focused on identifying what comes in and what comes out. This observes the law of mass conservation, where mass and energy are neither created nor destroyed, and that they're only transformed. Now, it may sound so abstract, but if we talk about mass flows, we're talking about the number of items that are shipped in and number of items that were shipped out, or number of items that were produced inside and number of items that were sent across to clients, and what are those materials that went out as waste or something that needs to be recycled. This is what MF 14051 can do. It not just only identifies or accounts how much materials went out as products or saleable products, but also tells you how much materials that were considered as waste that needs to be recycled. And they are considered as absolute law. So that being said, there's no excuse for us, ideally, to account everything. While cash flows tells you, while cash flow on a monthly basis will need to reconcile the cash in as well as cash out, so is also materials, and as well as with energy. The thing is, it needs a little bit more detail and several degrees of calculation in order for us to come up with a good balance. This is something that most environmental practitioners at least to have a level of idea. And then next we need to translate all these figures into a certain visuals. Management by practice will only wish only to see a level of information that is as quick as 5 minutes. So we talk about this in the form of a Sankey diagram. Before, by practice should we say, most industries would present it in the form of graphs, charts, dashboards. But when you use something that's easily, that creates a good story, a good flow of a story, ultimately that's the management wants to hear or wants to look at. So the challenge of how we can answer that simply by doing a Sankey diagram. It's very effective and has been used by energy sectors to present energy flows within the organization. But little we know, but we can also use that for material flows. Or you just need to understand the techniques and how does it work. It's easy actually. Now we understand this. What does it mean to have a material flow? So we have at least 3. What does it mean to implement them? So we need to involve the management and then specify a boundary and time period. So you need to define a boundary here. So when you do a mass flow or a cash flow or energy flows, you need to have a good boundary in order to have a good measurement and a time period as well. What's your basis? You could have it 1 year, you can have it a quarterly, depends on the necessity of the information. So that is very important when you conduct an MFA. Then you need to define the inputs and outputs for each quantity center. This is more of a process input-output analysis, and then come up with a balance. Ultimately, you need the output of this one is a table that consists of inflows and outflows on the processes in the organization. This is what is desired in this stage. And that being said, when you do a material flow, you need to be consistent with the units that you're using in order that it has a level of translation where it doesn't compromise or it doesn't create anomalies in the calculation process, which we have that in engineering practices, so it's also useful for those who are practicing environmental management. I think it's for all of us. And then after having a good sketch, you need to present that one in a simplistic fashion. Like I've said earlier in the principles, you need to summarize it in a simple sketch where a management or anyone, any third party, or be it your interested party or stakeholder, will be able to appreciate what does it mean to have a good visuals on the flow, on the material flows within the organization. And this will be useful for an EMS project managers and the team, because when they come up with options, they need to identify and assess of what are these opportunities that we can provide in order for us to strengthen up our EMS. So with the level of calculation that you are performing through material flow analysis and a good tracking of measurements And in defining of indicators, as defined by 14031, the practitioner or the EMS project manager, along with the environmental team, can use these figures in order for them to identify, evaluate, analyze, and evaluate what are the things that can be improved in the context of the organization in environmental performance, so that they can reduce their negative impacts, not just only in the environmental condition, but also in the way they practice business. So it's more than just a level of measurements. It's also about improving also our quality management practices. Ultimately, we can see that the relationship between performing an EMS and performing a quality management system, or even energy management system in ISO 50001, they're not really far from each other. Actually, if you use the concept in EMS and use them in energy management and also in quality management, you'll find that they have one thing in common: optimizing things while reducing impacts, and provide a level of transparency further using these two guidelines, the one that we mentioned earlier. So I'll share this options, the CP options tree as we call it here in our practice. So when you start with a resource efficiency, you need to minimize waste and recover them. And for you to minimize waste, you need to reduce waste at the source and do some internal recycling. But at the same time, you need to do external recycling and do some biological recycles. And when you do reduce at the source, either modify the product, modify your process, and when you do external recycling, you need to deal with structures and materials. And when you do process modification, you need to do good housekeeping practices, material selection, and new intervention of new technologies. Ultimately, today's technology provides you a level of environmental friendly options that would be beneficial to the enterprise, particularly in building up environmental programs, from which 14001 is requiring to do so in order to address the impacts towards environmental aspects. And more particularly, it's also a way of providing 14031 and 14051. We all know that EMS provides a level of complementation to improving the legal compliance, reporting practices, and reputation enhancement. In today's practice, we talked about the definition of carbon credits. Now, carbon credits, for you to define how much CO2 has been reduced in the organization, you need to have to practice a 14064. That's a three-part guideline talking about how do you validate how much CO2 has been reduced by introducing a several project, but more importantly, how much CO2 is reduced, that would require a level of detail. And for you to do that one, you need to have a good level of assessing material flows within the organization and a good set of indicators that reflects the company's performance in the context of quality and environment management. So 14064 will work effectively if at least you have a practice of performance evaluation in 14031 and a sound material flow analysis that can be done with the use of 14051. Now, what does this complement in providing external reports? The Global Reporting Institute, or the GRI, has been providing recommending a set of requirements on defining indicators in order for you to come up with a sustainability report. Now, for you to come up with a sustainability report, they are already defining a set of indicators. And for you to come up with a set of indicators, you need to define an industry-specific indicators aligned into those requirements from GRI. I think that's 4.1 if I'm not mistaken. And that being said, 14031 will do the job for you actually, and that's a very good head start for you once you do that sustainability reporting within the organization. In Europe, they are using EMS, and the output of such is to create an environmental report. Ultimately 14031, the practice has already been done in most of industries in Europe. And we talk about reputation, the level of transparency that an organization can establish through careful reporting using these sound guidelines to comply with the requirements in 14,001, that's already a good manifestation that the management, number one, is already doing its efforts to improve its environmental performance. More importantly, that would also provide a level of reputation that while most businesses are looking for those that provides environment friendly that practices environment friendly procedures, 14,001 will complement on that. Now, if they would ask further, at least there's a level of knowledge that a practitioner, that a company can ever use in order to show that they have a good performance in 14,001. That in turn creates a level of reputation that is incredibly positive for most enterprises, and that is an external context. But if we talk about internal, we're talking about sound ethics, environment-friendly workplace, and that would also support resource optimization. So we are seeing a lot of synergy, not just only in the inside, but also in the outside context, once EMS is practiced. And what could be better if you couple it up with EP 14031 and 14051? So that's the way things moving forward if an organization is really serious about taking up this management systems along with these two guidelines. That being said, I hope you got a lot of learnings based on this discussion, and I'm now open for some questions. And I would thank you very much, everyone, for taking this time with me to share to you about the benefits of having these two standards. Susanna?
Mr. Josh, thank you very much for this presentation. We actually have some of questions, but because the time is limited, we will try to answer some of them, and the others will be answered through email. So the first question is, according to your experience, what are the most common problems that may come up when complying the two EMS processes with the requirements of ISO 40001?
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to catch. Can you say it again, Susanna?
Yes. So the question is, what are the most common problems that may come up when you try to comply the two EMS processes with the requirements of ISO 40001?
Okay. By the processes, we talk about the two guidelines, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
If I come into that context, the challenge is practicality, because first, for most companies who wants to come up with a 14,001, they're definitely bound by a certain time frame, typically around 6 months. So, but that's one of the factors actually in setting up the 14,001 within the organization. Now, considering that there are also a lot of practices, especially for those who have a lot of management systems or environmental practices in place, they have to align that one with these with the standards. So that would also mean that their indicators will have to align with the indicators as defined, that will be potentially defined in this 14,001. Now, now, considering the level of alignment, that would be so tedious, because 14,001 demands also a level of detail that at the process level, everything has to be assessed. And 14,031 addresses exactly that. So while some organizations, they define environmental practices based on the condition, defining environmental performance at the process level, that will really take a lot of effort. So number one, time is of the essence, and number two is the level of detail, because 14,031, while it's a very good guideline to provide a level of a sound level of measurements for environmental performance, that is also tedious by nature. So I hope I had you answer the question.
Thank you very much. The second question is, may I know what is the difference between MFCA and ABC and lean accounting?
ABC, activity-based costing and lean accounting.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
MFCA and ABC and lean accounting, by principle, they are all the same. However, the unique pitch points here for MFCA is that the processes used in MFCA are more on is more focused on how material flows within the organization, while activity-based costing is more focused on for every activities how much is the corresponding cost it takes. And lean accounting is also into that context as well. In principle, they are all the same. However, for material flow and cost accounting, it's more defined, it's more attuned on you do an accounting on your processes. Now, how can you simplify the way it is presented so that the management may be able to appreciate the impacts or the environmental impacts, or should we say the environmental performance of the organization? So that's where the unique pitch point for doing an MFCA. For activity-based costing and lean accounting, that's more focused on quality, more on what the results, should we say, what are the benefits that the organization can see in improving its processes, and that's more on managing the input, managing the material, managing flows and cash flows, and or should we say the resource and cash flows within the organization, and much more focus on more on managing the processes at the tactical and operational level. In addition to that one, what MFCA does is what lean accounting and ABC does on a routine scale. It also will provide figure for the EMS, and also for which is also the reason why it is part of the family of standards. So I hope I had it addressed.
Mr. Joshua, thank you once again. This was a great presentation. I would also like to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of their busy schedule to join us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. We have received all of your questions, and because the time is limited, we will answer to your questions individually by email. Please also don't forget to check PECB's webinar schedule on our website, pecb.com, or our official media network. Until next Friday, bye-bye.